Good morrow, good listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Shakespeare podcast. This month, we've been exploring the world of Shakespeare and comic books, and today, as promised, I'd like to discuss Tezuka's Shakespeare Manga Theater with you. I have been suffering from a really bad cold, and my voice will probably sound like an ASMR content creator at times today. But I didn't want to delay recording any longer, so do bear with me. I would like to also remind you at this point, as I'm fairly new with this podcast, if you are enjoying it and would like me to continue making these episodes, could you please comment, share, and like? Also, send me suggestions about topics you'd like me to cover. It would be really nice to hear from you whether any of this is interesting or resonates with you. I'm hoping to iron out the final kinks in production and hopefully bring you a more consistent podcast experience in the new year. Before we dive into one of the most prolific adapters of Shakespeare, it's worth framing the larger phenomena. The combination of William Shakespeare, the undisputed icon of Western high culture, with Japanese manga, a medium often characterized as local, lowbrow popular culture. This seemingly paradoxical pairing is actually a profound act of intercultural translation. The trend of adapting Shakespeare for manga is a widespread phenomenon in Japan, with roots dating back to 1885 illustrations that depicted Antonio from The Merchant of Venice as a handsome entrepreneur during the Japanese era. More contemporary examples showcase extreme creative divergence, ranging from the influential 1970s girls manga or shoujo manga artist Moto Hagio casting a character as Rosalind from As You Like It in Poe no Ichizoku, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to the sci fi anime series Romeo X Juliet from 2007, and even a British publishing house creating the successful manga Shakespeare series to serve as a major vehicle for intercultural translation. In contrast to many Western graphic novel adaptations, which often strive for strict faithfulness, Japanese manga is known for taking greater creative liberty with the source material. These adaptations challenge the traditional hierarchical distinction between high and pop culture. Today, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about one of the most intriguing acts of cultural translation in the 20th century. The moment William Shakespeare, the canonical king of Western literature, met Osamu Tezuka, the founding god of Japanese manga. The result is the collected work known as Shakespeare Manga Theater. I came across this anthology at a flea market, coincidentally during my PhD years, when I was revisiting Kurosawa's Shakespeare films, and was fascinated with the art, which is not at all like the Japanese manga or animated Japanese films that I was used to. This is a more cartoony, Disney-esque style of drawing, inspired from early American animation. It's also not a single unified project, but rather an anthology of adaptations and interpretations Tezuka produced over nearly 25 years, from 1959 to 1982. This collection, far from being a simple translation, throws a wrench into the traditional idea of culture, challenging the dichotomy between the high culture West and the lowbrow popular culture of the East. The works collected here give Shakespeare a profound global afterlife that is simultaneously a tribute to his authority and a radical reimagining of his plays. The Shakespeare Manga Theater anthology spans key periods of Tezuka's prolific career and showcases his evolving approach to adaptation. The six identified adaptations are the 1959 Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Robiette, which is an episode from Astro Boy in 1965, Macbeth, an excerpt from the darker series Vampire in 1966, and Hamlet, The Taming of the Shrew, and Othello, all episodes from the later meta-theatrical series Rainbow Parakeet between 1981 and 1982. And if you look closely at that timeline, you'll see a shift. The earliest works, like The Merchant of Venice, were relatively straight narrative transpositions. But by the time he reached the 1980s, Tezuka was increasingly using Shakespeare's name less for the plot and more as a thematic signpost or a clever framing device, like a meta theatrical reference in his crime manga, Rainbow Parakeet. To understand these adaptations, we must understand Tezuka's post war context and his signature style. Tezuka was an artist shaped by the ruins of World War II and the subsequent period of intense economic growth and social contradiction in Japan. His narratives consistently wrestled with grand themes like the ethical consequences of technology, war, and the true meaning of humanity. He often drove his characters toward a ruinous end as they grappled with human frailties, reflecting his own sense that post war Japan was built on unresolved moral contradictions. Visually, Tezuka's adaptations are dynamic and cinematic. They embrace the signature audience pleasing Tezuka style, which is often described as big and flashy and in your face, ensuring the dense Shakespearean plots had an addictive page turning energy for a mass audience. Crucially, Tezuka deployed his famous star system, the practice of reusing the same character designs across different series to cast his plays. Members of Tezuka's star system would behave like repertory actors playing a similar role type across different unrelated stories or series. In the 1959 version of The Merchant of Venice, for example, Tezuka casts his established default shady villain, acetylene lamp, as Shylock. This transposition instantly signaled to the Japanese audience how they should feel about the character, converting Shylock's profound tragedy rooted in religious persecution into a straightforward trope of economic villainy. I think that it is Tezuka's willingness to take extreme creative liberties. It is what makes the collection a critical goldmine. For instance, in the case of The Merchant of Venice, the one that I've been mentioning so far, Tezuka leaves out the character of Jessica entirely. Jessica's subplot, her betrayal of her father, Shylock, and her conversion to Christianity, is central to the original play's discussion of religious tension and filial duty. It has been played up in recent productions as well, for instance, in the Merchant of Venice 1936 production, starring Tracy Ann Oberman as Shylock, or the 2015 production at Shakespeare's Globe, where Jonathan Pryce and his daughter Phoebe Price played Shylock and Jessica respectively. I was left in tears at the end of that show when Jessica is faced with the reality of her father having to give up his faith. I was a steward at the Globe and I got to watch the production at least 3 times. By removing Jessica, Tezuka effectively strips away these deeper socio religious complexities, streamlining the story into a modern morality tale about the dangers of unchecked financial contract law. In the case of Romeo and Robiette, which is an extended episode of Astro Boy, Tezuka takes Romeo and Juliet and transplants it into a skewed science fiction take. Instead of two feuding families, the Montagues and Capulets, we have two feuding robot inventors who program their robot children, Romeo and Robiette, to hate one another. But the robots inevitably fall in love. By replacing human blood and heritage with technological programming, the adaptation shifts the thematic focus. It explores the idea of programmed hatred imposed by human creators versus the emergent humanistic free will that allows the robots to choose love and self sacrifice over their destructive destiny. By the early 1980s, with the Rainbow Parakeet episodes, Tezuka demonstrated his highest level of fragmentation. For example, the Hamlet episode frames the action around a literal stage production, using the play as a backdrop for the protagonist's actions. However, with The Taming of the Shrew, the narrative departure is nearly complete. Reviewers note that the section only name drops the play but doesn't follow it. Here, Shakespeare's name functions purely as a cultural reference point to signal a tone or a genre, allowing the canonical authority to bolster an otherwise independent narrative. Ultimately, Tezuka utilized Shakespeare's tragic frameworks as a vehicle for internal Japanese critique. His focus on political downfall and ambition in adaptations like Macbeth and Hamlet resonated with the moral contradictions surrounding Japan's modernization after its military dictatorship. The tragedies served as metaphors for the inherent dangers of unchecked national ambition. Despite the darkness of the source material, a core humanistic thread runs through Tezuka's work. Much like his foundational work, Astro Boy, his Shakespeare adaptations often glorify self sacrifice. The tragic demise of characters, particularly in Romeo and Robiette, is often for the sake of others, offering a moral counterbalance to the pure nihilism sometimes associated with classical tragedy. By presenting Shakespeare in a highly accessible and dynamic manga format, Tezuka ensured the bard's work was consumed as gripping entertainment by a mass Japanese audience. His work is a foundational text for understanding how Shakespeare achieved a vibrant Shakespeare afterlife in Japanese pop culture, demonstrating that creative adaptation is not a debasement of authority, but an act of powerful intercultural reinterpretation. That's all for this episode of the Shakespeare podcast. As I mentioned in my previous episode, if you'd like to read up on this topic, I'd recommend Sven Arv Mikkelbost's Shakespeare Comics, Art, Time and Character, and Shakespeare and Comics Negotiating Cultural Value, edited by Jim Casey and Brandon Christopher, to start with. For more suggestions of which comic book Shakespeare you should try next, stick with me through the next few episodes this month. The next episode is my interview with Kev Sutherland, so do tune in for that one. I'd also like to let you know that there is a CFP out now on Shakespeare in comics and manga by the people behind the seminar in Porto that I mentioned in my last episode. I've put the details of the CFP in my show notes, so check that out and share with your network. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing my podcast with fellow enthusiasts and Shakespeare nerds. Email me at shakespop@gmail.com or find me on Insta, TikTok, Facebook, Blue Sky, and Threads and say hi. I hope you enjoyed listening to me as much as I've enjoyed talking to you. Goodbye.